Now we come to chapter 37. And now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, and this now begins from Genesis 37 till the end of this book. We have the story of Joseph. Tremendous man who began well and ended well. And in a book like Genesis, where we read of the mistakes of Noah, who got drunk. Anybody whose biography is given in detail, Abel we don't know much about. There's just a few verses written about Abel. But the other, Melchizedek, we don't know much about, just a few verses. But the ones whose biographies are given in detail, the men of God in the book of Enoch also like that, very few verses. But the lengthy biographies in Genesis are of Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. 5 people. And it's very interesting to see in all these 5 people that Joseph is the one man who stands out as one concerning whom we don't see a single thing spoken of as having been done as being evil or bad. Noah, Abraham told his lies, and Isaac we saw, Jacob we saw. But in contrast to all that is Joseph. Beginning at a young age, and he was 17. Think of that. 17 years of age, verse 2. Did he have elder brothers who were examples? His older brother committed adultery with his father's wife, Reuben. We just read that. Another 2 brothers were murderers, Simeon and Levi. We read about them. The 4th brother, we read in the next chapter, went and committed adultery with his daughter-in-law. And his sister was one of these modern teenagers who went and made a mess of her life. And from such a family, where nobody was an example, comes this young, God-fearing man who really had his heart open to God. He didn't go around judging, criticizing his brothers. He lived before God in humility. Tremendous example. We can't say there are no good examples for us to follow. Be an example yourself. Think of Joseph, alone, without meetings, without exhortations, without tapes, books, magazines, nothing. With a heart that was open for God. It shows what one young man can do in a home where most people don't have much interest in godliness. Tremendous, as you see. And Joseph was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth. And his friends were the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Children were misbehaving, and Joseph told his father but what was going on. He didn't try to take action himself. That was outside his authority. He just told his father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a vari-colored tunic. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Here is another case of partiality in a family. Special dresses for my favorite son. Special clothes for the one and only son I have, or the one and only daughter I have, or for my favorite daughter. Special clothes. Causing envy, partiality, favoritism. Again, it was there in Jacob's father's family, now it's in his own family too. And it caused a lot of problems. It caused problems between Jacob and Esau, and it's caused problems between Joseph and his brothers. It's just a warning to all parents to cleanse themselves of all partiality towards their children. And here's where we see Joseph's openness to God. He had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered round and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Are you really going to rule over us? We know that it was fulfilled. We know that a day came when all these 11 brothers bowed down to Joseph in Egypt. It was a prophetic dream. We know that Joseph was not a diplomat. He just shared what he heard from God. In simplicity. And it was prophetic. And the thing we see with interest here is a young 17-year-old man. Think of that age, 17 years, with ambitions, desires to become great, with passions in the body, to be open to God, to have dreams concerning spiritual things. Most 17-year-olds have dirty dreams. But here was a young 17-year-old who was dreaming where God was speaking to him. Amazing. Is God partial? There is no partiality with God. He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. That's written in Hebrews chapter 11, Hebrews 11:5 and 6, where we read of Old Testament saints. And here's one of those Old Testament saints. God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. And if Joseph found him, it must have been because God rewarded him, because he diligently sought God. Something like Samuel. In the midst of all the lack of examples in Samuel's days, Samuel was open to hear God, and God could speak to him. That is our calling in these days. There's compromise everywhere. There's worldliness everywhere. Even Christians who talk about victory over sin are not, generally speaking, wholehearted as they used to be. In the midst of all this, what shall we do? We shall be like Joseph. We shall be like Samuel. Lonely, alone, listening to God, hearing what God has to say, and keeping the standards without compromise. God's looking for young people like that. 17 years old, He can lay hold of you. 17, you don't have to be 70. Don't let the devil fool you. 17 years old, as I've often said, on the day of Pentecost, there was not a single gray hair on those apostles who stood there to build the church. Not one of them was over 33. Think of that. Young people, say between the ages of 28 to 33, these were the people who began to turn the world upside down from the day of Pentecost onwards. They were not 50, 60, 70-year-old people. If God can't lay hold of our life when we are young, I tell you the chances are pretty bleak that He'll ever do it later on in life. We'll just drift along. And most believers, even those who have accepted the new and living way, can just drift along. Seek God wholeheartedly. Then maybe you can have dreams in the night too from God. God speaking to you at night, in the middle of the night. And he had another dream, verse 9. It wasn't the end. It wasn't just a flash. No, it was a consistent thing. He had another dream. And he said, I have still another dream. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he told his father and his brothers. His father rebuked him. What is this dream? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you? And we know that's exactly what happened in Egypt. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father was a little more wise. He knew that such things can happen. He knew that God said when he was born that the elder will serve the younger. And he knew that that took place. So he said, maybe there's something here. And he kept it in mind. He didn't despise it. Yeah, that's really a tremendous encouragement for us. Particularly, I want to challenge all the young people here who are teenagers, boys and girls. I want to encourage you to be open to God. Be open to God. There's a verse in the book of Job, chapter 33, which says about God speaking in dreams at night. Job 33, verse 14. Indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one notices it. He speaks in a dream, a vision of the night, when sound sleep falls on men when they slumber in their beds. Then He opens the ears of men, Job 33:16, and seals their instruction. The purpose is that He may turn a man aside from his conduct and keep man from pride. from that which is unlike Christ in his life. He keeps back his soul from the pit. So God speaks in a dream, and we need to understand what God is speaking. But the thing I want you to notice here is this openness to hear God. Day and night we must be open to hear God. Not just soothe our conscience that I've read my Bible for 15 minutes, but to be open to hear God all the time, day and night. Lord, speak to me. And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Then his brothers went to pasture their flock, Genesis 37:12, in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them." And he said to him, "I'll go." And he said to him, "Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. I want you to notice here, in this whole story, from now onwards till Genesis 50, Joseph is a picture and a type of Jesus Christ. And just like Jacob sent Joseph to look for his brothers, God sent Jesus among the Jews to find them. The Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. And just like when Joseph came to his brothers, they sold him for some pieces of silver. Like that, Jesus, when he came to the Jews, he was also sold for some pieces of silver, because they were jealous of him. They hated him. They put him into the pit. They got rid of him. And rejected by his brothers. But finally we read that though his own brothers rejected him, he came to his own and his own did not receive him. Joseph went to the Gentiles, to Egypt, and there he was exalted to be a king. There in Egypt he found a bride, for he married an Egyptian. That is a picture of Jesus, rejected by his own brothers, the Jews, and coming to the Gentiles and finding a bride for himself from among the Gentiles. And then, after that, the Jews, his brothers, come back to Joseph to Egypt. And that is how we see finally the Jews coming back into the land today. And again, one day when Christ comes again, the God-fearing ones among them will find him to be their Savior. So it's a very beautiful picture here of Jesus. Joseph finally blessing his brothers, and finally the Lord blessing the Jews as well. You can keep that in mind as we go through. It's very beautiful how this is all pictured there. The history, the whole history of the Jewish people is there at the beginning of the Jewish race in a small capsule, as it were. And he goes searching for his brothers, and a man found him. He was wandering in the field and said, "What are you looking for?" He said, "I'm looking for my brothers." And the man said, "They moved from here. Let's go to Dothan." Then we see something about Joseph's diligence. He could have come back to his father and said, "Well, I didn't find them." But he was determined to fulfill the spirit of what his father commanded, not the letter. My father wants me to find them. So he said, if they've gone to Dothan, I'll go to Dothan. And he went after his brothers. Who? He went after brothers who were jealous of him, who hated him, who never spoke kindly to him. And there we see something about Joseph's goodness, that he's willing to go after these brothers of his, maybe to take some food for them perhaps. I'm sure Israel must have sent some food with Joseph. And when he didn't find them in one place, he doesn't come back. He goes and finds them. Be a brother like that to those who are not good to you. And when they saw him from a distance, they plotted against him to put him to death. He comes in love to them, and they are still full of their hatred, exactly like Christ came to Israel, into the midst of the Jews. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Now then, let us kill him," verse 20. "Throw him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." But there God watches the evil that other people plan to do to us. Do you believe that? If God was not watching at that time and doing something about it, Joseph would never have become the ruler in Egypt. He would have died. God's plan for Joseph would have been frustrated. But will God allow His plans for a God-fearing young man of His to be frustrated just because some people are jealous and evil towards him? Impossible. God will make all that jealousy and evil work together for good to this young man whom He has chosen. Think of that all the evil and hatred and jealousy that other people seek to pile upon us, what they speak and the evil they speak and the bad reports they give and everything they do, if we are God-fearing like Joseph, God is watching. He'll plan it all and make it all work for good. Because while they are planning to kill Joseph, God has got a hold of one man, Reuben. He gets a hold of Reuben and uses Reuben to save Joseph's life, because in verse 21 it says, Reuben says, let's not take his life, and he's the elder brother there. It's amazing how God can control one man in a crowd to change the direction which the crowd is planning to take. We have to believe that God's got control of that trade union leader there to change the situation. He's not converted. He's godless like Reuben, immoral like Reuben. Doesn't matter. God can still control him to fulfill His purposes for His children. And so Reuben suggests that they put him into a pit in the wilderness. He thought he could rescue him later. He seemed to have a good heart. And so they took off his very cut tunic, which is the cause of all their jealousy, threw him into the pit. There was no water in the pit, and they sat down to eat a meal, and Reuben had gone away somewhere. And as they raised their eyes, a caravan of Ishmaelites were on their camels going down to Egypt. And God's got a control of Judah now to plan something else. He says, why should we kill our brother? Let's just sell him to these Ishmaelites. And his brothers listened to him. God's got control of the second in command as well. He's got everybody in His hands to fulfill His purpose. And these Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 shekels of silver, something like the 30 pieces of silver that Judas Iscariot sold Jesus for. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. See how God fulfills His plan. If we wanted to fulfill that plan, we would do it with a mighty demonstration of power and all that, but God doesn't do it that way. He uses evil people to plan evil and to do evil, and the evil turns out to be for good. And that is a greater miracle than if God were to just finish off all His brothers and say, I'm going to defend my servant. No, let them do the evil. Just like in the case of Jesus Christ. Let them crucify Him. But through that crucifixion, Satan is defeated and salvation has come to the world. This is the principle of the Christian life. Let them crucify you, but through it will come salvation. Through it will come the fulfillment of God's purposes, if we have faith. When Reuben returned to the pit, he found Joseph was not there. He tore his garments. He said, the boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go? So they took Joseph's tunic and killed a male goat, dipped it in blood, verse 31, brought it to the father and said, is this your son's tunic? And Jacob, who had fooled his own father many years earlier, is now being fooled by his own children. It's amazing how 30 years later we begin to reap the potatoes we sowed, the wild oats we sowed 30 years earlier. Comes back, what we reap, what we sow. The way you fooled your father, one day you'll find your children fooling you. It's what we see. And Jacob tore his clothes. He really believed it. He was fooled 100%, just like he fooled his father 100%, maybe 30, 40 years earlier. And then all his sons and his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. That's where we read that he had more than one daughter, verse 35. All his sons and all his daughters. Surely I'll go down to Sheol in mourning. So his father wept for him. And here is another part of the fulfillment of God's purpose. The Midianites sold him to Potiphar, because there God has got something more to be fulfilled. Just into the right house. God's plan moves us right into the right employment, to the right tough character who's got an evil wife. Wonderful how God plans that we get employed in the right place. We have to believe in the sovereignty of God here for the fulfillment of His purpose, for testing us, and also for the fulfillment of His purpose. We praise God that He'll do the same for us, what He did for Joseph. Amen.